I didn't know that the man who once called me a safe place would someday choose silence over me. If I had known that, I might have paid closer attention to the moments I kept brushing off, the ones I labeled as normal adjustments, because love makes you generous with excuses. My name is Emily Carter, and this isn't a story about one big betrayal. It's about emotional erosion, the kind that happens so quietly you don't realize how empty you've become until there's almost nothing left. Before I go any further, I need to know something, because back then I truly believed I was the only woman living this kind of quiet heartbreak. Tell me in the comments which city you're listening from, because knowing this pain reached someone else might make reliving it a little easier for me. 3 years before marriage, Jason Miller was my best friend before he was ever my husband. We met in Austin, Texas, both of us young, broke, and convinced we were one good opportunity away from finally making it. Our life was simple back then. Late-night tacos from food trucks, playlists we built together song by song, and conversations that stretched past midnight and made you feel understood in a way that's rare. Jason had this calm energy, like no matter how messy life got, being with him meant you were safe. He used to look at me and say, you're my peace. I believed that completely. We talked about everything, careers, future kids, cross-country road trips, and yes, even family boundaries. I remember asking him once, half joking but half serious, what if your mom and I don't really click? He smiled and said, that won't happen. And even if it does, I've got you. We're a team. At the time, that felt solid. Permanent. Our wedding was small and intimate, nothing flashy. String lights, close friends, happy tears, and that crisp October air that makes you feel like life is finally lining up the way it's supposed to. His mom, Linda Miller, hugged me tightly that day and whispered, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart." I held onto that sentence like proof that I belonged. When Jason suggested we stay at his childhood home for a few months to save money, I didn't hesitate. It felt logical, temporary, harmless. For the first few months, Linda was warm. She asked about my job, praised my cooking, told Jason how lucky he was. I honestly thought I'd hit the mother-in-law jackpot. Then somewhere between month 3 and 4, the atmosphere shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to make you doubt your own instincts. She'd sigh if I slept in on a Saturday. She'd rearrange the kitchen after I cooked and casually say, "This is how we've always done it in this house." If I laughed it off, she'd smile like she'd scored a quiet point. At work, I was doing well. Long hours, non-stop Zoom calls, deadlines that pushed me but also made me proud. Jason knew how much my career meant to me. But Linda started sliding comments into dinner conversations like, back in my day, wives were home by 5, or a man needs peace when he comes back from work. Jason would let out a short laugh, and the silence that followed always settled on me. When I tried to talk to him later, he'd say, "You're overthinking it, Em. She doesn't mean it like that." That sentence became his go-to response. Overthinking it. Reading too much into it. It was the first time I felt like I had to explain my pain as if it needed proof. Linda's behavior didn't stop, it refined itself. If I wore jeans, I looked careless. If I dressed up, she'd ask who I was trying to impress. One evening, she casually mentioned how Jason's cousin's wife quit her job right after marriage and how some women just know how to prioritize family. It wasn't advice. It was comparison. And Jason absorbed it because later that night he said, "Maybe my mom's right. Maybe you're too focused on work lately." That line hit harder than anything Linda had said because it didn't come from her. It came from the man who once promised to stand with me. From that point on, Linda began reminding me, subtly but consistently, that she had history on her side. Jason was different before marriage, she said one afternoon while folding laundry, not even looking at me. Happier. Less stressed. I stood there, frozen, wondering how I'd somehow become the explanation for her son's unhappiness. Anytime I tried to defend myself, she'd soften instantly, complain about a headache, or say, "Oh, I didn't mean it like that." Jason would rush to her side, giving me that look, the one that said I'd crossed an invisible line. I started choosing silence because it felt safer than being misunderstood. I stopped correcting her. I stopped sharing how I felt. I told myself it was temporary, that once we moved out, things would change. But every night, lying beside Jason while he scrolled through his phone, I felt lonelier married than I ever had single. If you were in my place, blamed without doing anything wrong, slowly losing your voice just to keep the peace. What would you have done? Stayed quiet like I did, or spoken up and risked being labeled the problem? Tell me honestly in the comments, because silence almost broke me. The house grew heavier with every passing week. Linda never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She controlled the space, the routines, and slowly, my husband's loyalty. And I didn't know it yet, but this was only the setup. The real damage hadn't even begun. I used to think the worst part was feeling invisible, but soon I realized invisibility slowly turns into blame, and blame, well, it eats away at you quietly, until even your own instincts feel like a betrayal. The house didn't just feel heavy anymore, it felt alive, like it was watching, judging, cataloging every misstep I didn't even know I was making. Linda had this uncanny talent for positioning herself 2 steps behind me without appearing intrusive, like a shadow collecting evidence. If a light was left on, she'd casually remark, "Electric bills add up, you know." If I ordered takeout after a 12-hour workday, she'd sigh and comment, "Guess cooking isn't everyone's forte." On the surface, these were neutral lines, harmless even. But under the skin, they carried a message I couldn't ignore. I wasn't enough. Jason's shift was subtler, yet more damaging. His once calm energy now carried hesitation. Pauses punctuated his words. When I tried sharing my day, he'd glance at his phone, nod minimally, or say, "Mom feels you've been a little distant lately." And suddenly, my marriage felt like a feedback loop I never signed up for. I chose my words carefully, remaining calm, only to hear, "I don't want drama, Emily. Can we just keep things smooth?" Smooth. That word became a weight I carried in silence, because it meant quiet, convenient, and easiest for him, but lethal for me. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. Linda invited relatives over without notice. I walked in, tired, still in my work clothes, only to find myself hosting a room full of people who were silently judging me. Linda smiled, "Oh good, you're home." Everyone was asking where you were. Her casual delivery felt like a trap. During dinner, she remarked how I was always busy and how Jason ate alone most nights. It was false, but Jason didn't correct her. His silence screamed louder than any argument. In that moment, the confident woman I knew myself to be began to crack quietly, my chest tightening with a slow, hollow ache. Later, confronting Jason brought no relief. "I didn't want to embarrass her," he said. "What about me? When did my feelings become secondary?" That question went unanswered. Linda's behavior evolved into textbook gaslighting. If I asked for rest, she'd say, "Of course, I forget you're not used to managing a household." If I sought Jason's support, she'd clutch her chest or claim fatigue, shifting focus away from my concerns. He'd panic over her, leaving me to feel like a villain for voicing the slightest complaint. Have you ever been in a situation where someone else's fragility cages you? Tell me in the comments, because I truly thought I was losing my mind. The emotional weight seeped into my work life. Sleepless nights, knots in my stomach, subtle self-doubt, the kind that colleagues notice in passing, the kind that erodes confidence. Linda noticed, too. "Marriage is hard for strong women," she said one morning, almost tenderly. "You're ambitious, but sometimes strong women struggle to adjust." Jason nodded like that explained everything. I wanted to shout, but I didn't. I wanted to throw words sharp enough to pierce her thinly veiled authority, but fear beat me to the punch. I began documenting everything in my head, not just as memory, but as survival. Dates, comments, who was present, tones of voice, I recorded it all. Not because I wanted to keep score, but because I feared being called crazy if I spoke up. Because my self-trust had started slipping through my fingers, leaving me questioning even my own instincts. Linda's comments grew bolder, more deliberate. She told Jason things like, "I don't recognize you anymore," and, somehow unspoken, I became the cause of the discomfort. By the end of that month, the house had become a pressure cooker. Silence was currency, and love had conditions. I shrank, explained, waited. And still, a part of me hoped Jason would notice, intervene, protect me. But deep down, I knew that speaking up next would have a price. Not just surprise or confrontation, but a reckoning that could either break the walls Linda had built or break me entirely. The tension hummed under the surface, a warning whisper. Every choice, every word, now carried risk, and the next moment I spoke would change everything forever. Have you ever stayed quiet for too long because speaking up felt like a gamble? Tell me in the comments. Because back then, every time I considered raising my voice, my heart raced with both hope and dread, and I knew that whatever came next would test everything I believed about love, loyalty, and survival. I never imagined that the weight of a morning could feel heavier than the night before, but that Thursday it did. Rolling out of bed, I caught a glimpse of Jason asleep, earbuds in, his playlist humming a familiar tune. I wanted to shake him, to shout that I couldn't do this anymore, but the words choked somewhere between my throat and my mind. The kitchen smelled faintly of yesterday's takeout, Linda's subtle, "I guess not everyone can cook like a pro," hovering like a ghost, and suddenly, my own apartment, my own marriage, felt like a cage. Every little thing Linda did, the sighs, the comparisons, "Oh, Jason told me you couldn't do it right," was calibrated to make me shrink, and each time Jason murmured, "Just let it slide, babe, she doesn't mean it," I felt my voice dissolving a little more. I started documenting in my head, trying to track patterns, remembering every veiled comment, every judgment disguised as advice. Fear kept me cautious. I didn't want anyone to see me as the dramatic wife, or worse, crazy. Writing it down in my thoughts became my only safe space, a private journal I couldn't risk on paper. And still, I played the role of the cheerful, balanced partner, laughing when Jason cracked a joke, nodding when Linda smiled in a way that hit a jab. I was a master of pretending, and it was exhausting. By midweek, the tension felt suffocating. I walked through the hallway, past their familiar frames and family photos, and felt the weight of every unspoken word. Jason was quiet, his silence not protective but complicit, and Linda's smirk was sharp as ever, her eyes glinting like she knew she was winning. I wanted to scream at him, at her, at the entire universe, but I froze, my body heavy, my chest tight. The whole thing was a mess, and he didn't even see it coming. Not a freaking clue. By this point, I wasn't just a wife. I was a strategist, a witness, a player. And while Daniel assumed he had orchestrated every move, I had become the quiet storm, the one who knew every pattern, every secret, every lie. And the day I decided to act, to make sure he understood he wasn't untouchable, that day would come sooner than he expected. What I didn't know yet was that the next move would change everything. Not just for him, but for all of us. And when it happened, the rules he thought he was writing wouldn't exist anymore. The days that followed became a delicate dance. I watched Daniel like someone tracking a predator, except this predator shared my home, my bed, my life. Every subtle movement, every whispered word, every glance at his phone became a clue. I wasn't living anymore. I was strategizing, collecting ammunition. Every conversation, even mundane ones about grocery lists or laundry, I filtered for hidden meanings, tiny slips that could unravel him. And Daniel? He had no freaking clue. The irony was delicious. He was meticulous, calculated, believing he was untouchable, and I, his naive wife, had quietly mapped his entire shadow world. I had folders, schedules, and mental notes. Every Friday dinner with his parents became an intelligence-gathering session. The way he shifted his eyes when a topic didn't suit him, the tone he used when discussing the future, the tiny frown lines when he thought I wasn't watching, all of it cataloged. Then came Maxwell. His entry was subtle, but significant. Daniel never expected I'd notice the casual exchanges, the way Maxwell lingered slightly longer than he should, his body language relaxed, unaware of the silent observer in the shadows. I realized quickly, Maxwell could be an unwitting key to understanding Daniel's hidden life. The chessboard had expanded, and I held more pieces than I initially imagined. I whispered to myself, "This is insane. You didn't sign up for this." Yet every time I opened my mouth, Jason's calm voice cut me off. "Don't start, Emily. Just keep things smooth." My internal revolt roared, but my lips remained sealed. By afternoon, I was collapsing under the dual pressure of home and work. Even my colleagues noticed subtle shifts, my hesitations, my distracted air. One of them asked if I was okay, and I smiled weakly, hiding the storm inside. Documenting, remembering, planning, I realized I had become an observer of my own life, not an active participant. My joy, my spontaneity, all muted by the relentless undercurrent of manipulation. And then, a small twist I didn't anticipate. While sorting some files for work, I glanced at Jason's laptop screen and saw an email he accidentally left open. He had forwarded one of Linda's pointed messages to his personal email, annotating with "She's got a point, need to adjust." My heart sank. Not only was he silent, not only was he mirroring her, but he was actively internalizing her perspective. My fear crystallized into a new, sharper edge. This was not temporary. This wasn't minor. This was rewriting the foundation of our marriage. I sank into the couch, hands trembling. And that's when I decided I couldn't keep it bottled. I would speak. But the next moment, the cost of speaking up, of confronting both Linda and Jason, was a question I couldn't answer. Would it make him see me, or would it shatter what little remained of our connection? The weight of that uncertainty felt like a punch to the chest. And still, deep down, a flicker of resolve ignited. I wouldn't disappear silently. Have you ever felt like you were being cornered, watched, and judged in the same house where love was supposed to reside? That slow erosion of trust, that quiet, corrosive tension, it's exhausting. I wanted to scream, to call out the injustice, to reclaim my own voice. And yet, every micro moment, her smirk, his nod, my colleagues' polite glances, held me back, chaining my anger in silence. By evening, I walked past the living room, Linda humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like mockery. Jason, reading on the sofa, didn't even look up. And that's when the realization hit fully. I had become a ghost in my own home. My life, my voice, my confidence, all being chipped away piece by piece. And still, as much as fear rooted me to silence, a seed of defiance had been planted. The next move I made would change everything. It wouldn't be a scream, not yet. But the first crack, the first assertion of myself, would mark a line Linda couldn't cross without revealing her true colors, and Jason would finally have to make a choice. The question was, would I be ready for the storm I knew would come? I could feel it, the tension that had been simmering for weeks finally hitting a boiling point. Saturday morning, sunlight slicing through the blinds, felt more like interrogation lights than comfort. Jason was sprawled on the couch, headphones in, pretending not to notice the storm I was carrying silently. Linda, of course, didn't miss the opportunity to pierce it further. "Emily, I'm just saying, a little organization goes a long way. You know how Jason likes things. Can't expect him to manage everything for you," she said, tone so sweet it could mask a blade. I froze. Words clung to my throat. My fingers twitched, itching to grab the coffee mug just to feel something real in my hands, something tangible amid this psychological fog. I wanted to scream, to accuse, to make someone see the silent destruction, but fear and disbelief chained me. And then I noticed the tiny smirk at the corner of her lips, the one she'd worn countless times when she scored a point without overt aggression. Jason glanced up for a second, not correcting her, not shielding me. Just a faint nod, almost apologetic, but it carried the weight of betrayal. It was subtle, yes, but in that subtlety lay the cruelest dagger. I wasn't alone in this house, I was outnumbered. His passivity wasn't kindness. It wasn't avoidance. It was choosing her over me. By mid-afternoon, I had gone for a walk, trying to escape the suffocating heat of our apartment, the invisible walls closing in, every memory of laughter now tainted. The streets of Austin were bustling, people jogging, dogs yipping, music from car speakers drifting out, a normal weekend. Yet, I felt trapped, suffocating. I felt like I was performing on some reality show where every misstep, every blink, every breath could be dissected, mocked, replayed in slow motion in the minds of the people I lived with. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through notes I'd been keeping in secret. The documentation, my mental journal, was meticulous. Every comment from Linda, every micro-expression from Jason, every little guilt trip cataloged. I was trying to anchor myself in reality, to maintain proof that my feelings were valid, that my perception wasn't warped. And yet, even with evidence in my mind, the anxiety gnawed at me. What if I overreacted? What if I was indeed the dramatic one? Later that evening, we had a casual dinner with friends who lived a few blocks away. I had hoped for normalcy. But as soon as we walked in, Linda's voice cut through the warmth like a scalpel. "Oh, Emily, I just told Jason last week, some people might not manage time as efficiently, you know? Not everyone can handle multitasking like us." She laughed lightly, her tone honey-sweet, but the sting was unmistakable. Jason offered a half smile, glanced at me, and muttered, "Don't worry about it." But it wasn't reassuring, it was alignment. He wasn't defending me. He was placating her. That night, in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, I felt the walls of my mind closing in. I wanted to talk, to express, to shake him awake from this fog of passivity, but a voice inside whispered, "Not tonight, Emily. Wait. Watch. Document." The anger that had been simmering for weeks threatened to burst out. I clenched my fists, feeling the pulse of rage beneath the skin, the kind of rage that makes you tremble silently. Saturday unfolded like a psychological minefield. Every glance, every remark, every sigh from Linda was a trap. Jason's silence was a barrier, a confirmation that he would not shield me. I was isolated, emotionally naked, and aware of it. I started noticing patterns, microsignals I had overlooked before, how he tilted his head slightly when she spoke, how his tone softened, how his eyes avoided meeting mine. The betrayal was invisible to outsiders, but to me, it screamed. By late afternoon, I decided to take control in a small way. I cooked a meal myself, deliberately ignoring Linda's faint critiques. Interesting choice. Not my style, but if Jason likes it, she said, dripping sugar-coated venom. Jason ate silently, and I caught a glimpse of guilt, or was it discomfort, flicker across his face. Small victory, fleeting but real. My heartbeat steadied. My agency had returned, a tiny flame against the consuming shadows. As the night deepened, I lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, pondering the escalation. I realized that this wasn't a battle I could win with words alone. It required strategy, observation, and patience. I had to pick my moments. Each interaction was a chess move. Each silence, a calculated pause. And then, unexpectedly, a twist. I noticed a subtle shift in Jason. When Linda complimented him in front of friends, he didn't just nod. He added a soft chuckle, almost mirroring her mockery of me earlier. It was subtle, easily missed, but not by me. The psychological pattern was escalating, moving from passive alignment to active collusion. I felt a shiver. The reality hit hard. My trust was eroding faster than I could patch it. And still, a part of me burned with defiance. The first crack in Linda's control, the first real assertion of myself, would be pivotal. I knew I had to plan carefully. I had to prepare for confrontation, and I had to decide whether Jason could ever be on my side again, or if he was already lost in the shadows of his mother's influence. Have you ever felt your own home turn into a battlefield? The air thick with unspoken rules, the floor littered with emotional landmines, your own partner silently choosing the opposing side? That's how it felt, exhausting, terrifying, and intoxicating in a way I couldn't admit aloud. I wanted to scream, to throw plates, to make someone understand the depth of my despair. But I stayed quiet, the seed of resolve buried deep under layers of fear and careful calculation. By the end of Saturday, I had mapped out a plan, mentally rehearsed every conversation, predicted every possible outcome. I was ready to step out of the shadows I had been forced into. The stakes were higher than ever, and the game had changed. Next week would bring decisions, confrontations, and consequences I could no longer avoid. And in that, for the first time in weeks, I felt the flicker of power returning. The twist lingered in my mind, an unexpected micro-reversal. Jason's small chuckles, his subtle complicity, hinted that the real battle wouldn't just be against Linda. It would be against the man I once called my safe place. And the thought sent a shiver down my spine, thrilling and terrifying at once. I woke up to the low hum of the AC, the city outside buzzing like a living organism, but inside, the apartment felt like a cage. Last night's simmering confrontation had left me raw, every nerve ending alert. I could still feel Linda's words echoing, her sugar-coated critiques, and Jason's silent nods that felt more like betrayals. It was time to stop tiptoeing, to move beyond silent documentation. I started my Saturday with coffee in hand, trying to map out my mental battlefield. Every comment from Linda, every subtle jab, every glance Jason didn't meet, it all needed to be cataloged, analyzed, anticipated. I felt like a general planning a siege, my mind both exhausted and razor-sharp. This wasn't just about survival, it was about strategy, about reclaiming agency in a house that had slowly become a labyrinth of microaggressions. Jason, of course, remained in his bubble, headphones on, typing away at his laptop. I caught him rolling his eyes when Linda said, "Emily, it's fine, but Jason deserves someone who can manage both work and home without stressing him out." That tone, so casual, so innocent, so devastating, was exactly the kind that broke spirits without leaving a mark. Jason didn't interject. He didn't shield me. He barely looked my way. His complicity was invisible to anyone else, but to me, it was a guillotine. By mid-morning, I found myself pacing the living room, thoughts spiraling. I could feel anger bubbling underneath, hot and suffocating. I wanted to shout, to scream, to fling plates across the room, but the Emily who had survived these weeks knew better. Silence was my armor, observation my weapon. Yet the anger needed release, or it would corrode me from the inside. I muttered under my breath, "I'm not invisible. I see everything. I remember everything." Around noon, the subtle twist hit me. I noticed Jason mirroring Linda's tone, her tiny micro-expressions when she spoke, her pauses, her deliberate smiles. He wasn't just passive anymore. He was adopting her rhythm, internalizing her cues. It was chilling. The person I once considered my safe place had started reflecting the very woman who had been systematically dismantling my peace. I left the apartment, needing fresh air and distance. The streets of Austin were alive, music thumping from cars, bikers revving engines, neighbors walking dogs. Normal life. But I felt like a ghost moving through someone else's reality. I stopped at a small cafe, ordered a latte, and scribbled in my notebook. The physical act of recording my thoughts felt like the first real act of defiance. Every sentence was a stake in my mental territory, a claim that I existed, that my perspective mattered. Evening arrived with tension thicker than molasses. Friends came over, casual chatter filling the living room, but Linda, of course, hijacked the space. "Emily, don't you think it's adorable how Jason tries to handle everything? He must be so grateful for my guidance." The words dripped sweetly, venom hidden beneath politeness. Jason laughed lightly, just enough to affirm her point, leaving me exposed. My stomach twisted. My hands shook slightly, gripping the edge of my chair. And then the twist, a micro-moment that could have gone unnoticed. Jason leaned toward her during a comment about me being too sensitive and whispered agreement, just a faint echo, almost imperceptible. But I saw it. That whisper was a pivot, signaling a shift from passive ally to subtle conspirator. My mind raced. How could I confront this? Could confrontation even work if he wasn't truly on my side anymore? I excused myself to the kitchen, needing space, needing a plan. Cooking had become my ritual, my small act of autonomy. I chopped vegetables methodically, each slice grounding me. Linda peeked in, her smile flawless, eyes gleaming with triumph. "Emily, that looks interesting. Jason seems to enjoy it." Her tone implied she owned both him and my efforts. I swallowed back a retort. Instead, I poured water over my hands, letting the cool liquid settle my nerves. Night came, heavy and oppressive. I sat by the window, gazing at the city lights, replaying the day. The pattern was undeniable. Gaslighting, complicity, silence. And yet, beneath the fear, a flicker of resolve sparked. I couldn't undo weeks of manipulation in one night, but I could start asserting myself subtly, planting seeds of resistance. I mapped conversations, rehearsed responses, visualized outcomes. Then the microclimax, a revelation that rattled me more than anything. Jason's behavior wasn't just reflective, it was adaptive. He had started subtly repeating her criticisms in my presence when I tried to speak, small enough to fly under any external radar, but damning within our private world. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just psychological warfare, this was active collusion, and it changed everything. I pulled my notebook closer, jotting notes, capturing nuances, her smile, his nod, their timing. Each detail a thread in the web I needed to untangle. I realized the confrontation I had imagined wouldn't just be about Linda. It would be about him, the man I trusted, the man who now stood silently or subtly against me. The stakes had grown beyond anything I had prepared for. And there it was, the new twist that would define the coming week. My home wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a theater of manipulation, with Jason and Linda performing a duet I hadn't auditioned for. And yet, for the first time, I felt clarity piercing the haze. To reclaim my voice, to regain control, I had to be smarter, faster, and braver than ever. Have you ever realized that the person you counted on might be the one undermining you, quietly, so subtly that even your instincts hesitate to trust? That was my Saturday. Exhausting, terrifying, and yet empowering. The next confrontation would come, and this time it wouldn't be silent. I wasn't just observing anymore. I was readying for the first real strike. I woke up Sunday morning with a heaviness I couldn't shake. The apartment was quiet, deceptively calm, like the calm before a storm you knew was coming. I had rehearsed every word, every stance, every subtle boundary in my mind. Today wasn't just another day, it was the day I stopped shrinking. Jason was at the kitchen counter, sipping his coffee, earbuds in, completely tuned out. I caught a flicker in his eyes, recognition, maybe, or guilt, but fleeting. Linda floated in like always, radiant in a way that concealed intent. "Morning, Emily," she said, sweet as honey, sharp as broken glass. I drew a deep breath, feeling a knot in my stomach and an adrenaline spike I hadn't had in weeks. This ends today, I told myself. I wasn't naive. I knew Linda's games, Jason's passive routines, the subtle alliances formed over weeks of silence. But I had one advantage they hadn't counted on: clarity. I started with small shifts. Words first, tone second. "I need to speak up today," I murmured to myself, almost like a mantra. Linda's eyes followed me as I moved with purpose. Jason glanced briefly at me, then back at his laptop. His silence was still complicity, but my resolve didn't waver. The morning unfolded like a minefield. Linda made her usual passive-aggressive comments, but this time, I didn't flinch. When she quipped about my inability to handle pressure at work and home simultaneously, I didn't shrink. I met her gaze and said calmly, "I hear you, but I'm managing fine. Your input is noted." My voice was steady, measured, but there was steel beneath the calm. Jason tensed. I saw it in the way he stiffened, the subtle exhale he tried to mask. I continued, layering subtle truths in casual conversation, exposing inconsistencies in Linda's micro-narratives, pointing out gently how some advice had caused tension rather than improvement. She blinked, momentarily thrown off. It was tiny, but enough. Enough to crack her perfect veneer. By noon, the tension reached a visible edge. Linda tried her usual charm: offensive, sweet smiles, empathetic sighs, but I wasn't responding to her cues. Jason tried to interject, a soft, "Emily, maybe," but I cut him off politely. "No, Jason. I need to finish this. Your input can wait." His jaw clenched, the first sign of rebellion or shame. The real shift came mid-afternoon. I had invited a colleague over under the guise of work discussion. Linda tried to micromanage, to interject with subtle digs, but with witnesses present, her moves felt exposed. Her tone faltered, her smile became sharper but forced. Jason mirrored me instead of her. He spoke up, quietly, correcting her half-truths, siding with clarity over collusion. I felt a flicker of surprise, relief, but I stayed focused, riding the psychological wave I had been building all week. Then it hit, the climax, subtle but undeniable. Linda attempted a final strike, bringing up a private incident I had documented mentally for weeks, twisting it publicly. She smirked, expecting me to collapse under humiliation. Instead, I calmly presented facts, dissecting her misrepresentations without anger, without shouting, but with undeniable precision. The room fell silent. Even Jason couldn't hide his astonishment. I realized in that moment that control wasn't about volume or dramatics. It was about truth, clarity, and timing. I held space for Linda to react, letting her reveal her manipulative patterns in full view. Every flicker of guilt, every forced laugh, every hesitation was a victory. I didn't need to win loudly. I needed to win visibly, ethically, and psychologically. Evening descended, soft golden light filtering into the apartment. Jason came over, a tentative smile on his face. "I didn't realize how deep this went." "I want to be better, Emily," he admitted, finally breaking his weeks-long pattern of avoidance. I nodded, cautiously optimistic. Trust would take time, but the seed of accountability had been planted. Linda, meanwhile, retreated, her subtle power fractured. I didn't gloat, didn't point fingers. Her downfall wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, inevitable. I had survived, observed, and acted strategically. And for the first time in months, I felt a real sense of agency, a reclamation of my voice, my space, my peace. I sank onto the sofa, letting the weight lift from my shoulders. The battle had been exhausting, terrifying, but transformative. I realized something fundamental. Silence could protect you, observation could save you, but courage, calculated, persistent, unwavering courage, could free you. And as the city lights of Austin flickered on, casting golden speckles across the floor, I smiled to myself. The story wasn't just about surviving manipulation. It was about reclaiming life, carving a space where your voice mattered, where subtlety could be a weapon, and where trust was rebuilt on honesty and respect. I knew this wasn't the end of challenges. Jason and Linda would still have roles in my life. The echoes of the past would linger. But the narrative had changed. I wasn't just a character in someone else's story anymore. I was the author of my own, and for the first time, the ending was mine to write.